You've drawn your crumbling arches. You've scattered your basalt blocks between the dunes. You've carved a mysterious golden wheel onto a solitary pillar and hidden a treasure chest at the bottom of a long dried-up well. But when your protagonist steps into the half-buried city, something feels off. It feels like a movie set rather than a historic site, like you've invented a backdrop instead of discovering a tragedy. The reason is remarkably simple and too often overlooked. A ruin is not an aesthetic choice. It's a coroner's report. Every broken facade, silted harbour, and unfinished wall is a physical clue. A city doesn't exist because it is grand. It exists because it solved a specific problem of survival. And it becomes a ruin when the solution fails. The shape of the wreckage is dictated by two forces: what it was when it was alive, and the exact anatomy of what killed it. If you want your world to feel real, stop treating ruins as decoration. When you look at an abandoned city, you shouldn't see mystery. You should see the cause of death. And today, I'm going to show you how to do just that. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time World Building with your host, Marie Mullaney. Underneath the romance of the forgotten city, a ruined city is just a broken system. The architecture speaks of the people who built it, and the rubble speaks of how the network failed them. In the logistics of world building, there are 4 ways a metropolis dies. Type 1 is the sudden trauma or the flash freeze. This is the simplest collapse, a near instantaneous, unpredictable disaster that catches a civilization mid-stride. In our world, this is Pompeii. A volcano blows and life is frozen in the heat. When you unearth a sudden trauma ruin, you should be able to see that the system didn't wind down and slowly disintegrate, but instead it was snapped off mid-stride. How will you see that? Through clues like loaves of bread still sitting in the brick ovens, wealth scattered on the tables in homes, graffiti still painting the walls. And most importantly, the remains of people unburied, running from or fatalistically waiting for the hand of God to smite them. To implement this kind of ruin in your world, add those details of life broken in the midst of an average day. Look for the devastatingly human details: the grandmother who stayed in her bed, the soldier frozen at the gate. And of course, this is fantasy. Your disaster could be a magical one, caused by mages striking each other or a monstrous creature sucking all living energy from a region, creating an instant desert. More on that later when we look at a case study. Type 2 of city destruction is homicide or erasure. In our world, this was city-on-city violence. More than a war, it was the intentional termination of a competitor. In history, the great example of this is Carthage. After the Third Punic War, the Romans flipped their lid and leveled the city block by block, burnt the infrastructure, and dragged the survivors away in chains. When unearthing a city homicide, you should see a specific destructive layer in the soil: charcoal, shattered pottery, and bent weapons slammed together, standing pillars shattered alongside buildings, everything turned to uniform rubble. The only population left are skeletons thrown into mass graves. Or you might leave the city standing, but the inhabitants are completely wrong for the architecture. We see this in Tolkien's Mines of Moira. A predator, the Balrog, hollows out the dwarven civilization from the inside. The only dwarves left are skeletons, but the architecture remains of the city. However, that doesn't mean the city is unoccupied. Instead, the occupants are replaced by a parasitic force, the orcs, who occupy a space they could never build. When creating this kind of ruin, remember that homicide leaves scars of desperation. Look for the last stands, a shattered bridge where a wizard held the line while refugees fled into the wastes. Look for evidence of looting, because an army frustrated by a siege will always break the city to get their bag. And look for the destruction wrought on the city, either by the army or by the parasitic inhabitants that moved in afterward. Type 3 is the critical organ failure or the empty husk. A city does not need to be hated or burned to die. Sometimes the infrastructure supporting it is simply yanked away, and the city hollows out from the inside. This is London after 410 AD. Yes, London, in Britain, the one with millions of people in it. Yes, it was a ruin for a long time. When the Roman legions pulled out of Britain, the active defense of London disappeared. Trade didn't stop entirely, that's a myth, but because the roads and seas became much more dangerous, trade did shrink, and without the imperial network, the massive stone city was no longer viable. The people simply packed up and walked away to the countryside. For 2 centuries, London was a ghost town. When the Anglo-Saxons arrived, they were terrified of the huge city and called it the work of giants, and built a separate wooden town a mile away. In this kind of ruin, the clues are all tied into the quiet decay of purpose. High-end public baths turned into crude sheep pens by local farmers who just need a water trowel. Marble villa floors scorched by messy campfires from passing travellers. Silted up harbours and forests reclaiming the broad roads that once carried goods. When building this kind of ruin, the important rule to remember is this: nobody attacked the city. It was just too big to function without its subsidy. The system died of starvation, leaving an oversized husk for survivors to scavenge. Kind of like a whale fall. And if you don't know what a whale fall is, I made a video about what you can do with whale falls in fantasy. Check that out in the information card. Our 4th type of ruin is the rejected city or broken contract. This is one of the most profound ruins where the city is destroyed by its own citizens. This is Cahoeca, the immense earthen metropolis near the Mississippi River. It rose suddenly in the 11th century, aligning with the supernova of 1054, a brilliant guest star that shone in the daylight for weeks. The priestly elite likely used this beacon to legitimize their rule, drawing thousands of people in to build a stratified society where the rich lived on mounds physically elevated above the laborers. But when the Middle Ages warm period ended, the climate cooled. Intense logging had caused catastrophic flooding and crop failures in Cahoeca. This broke the divine promise. The guest star had long since faded to nothing. So the people did something very devastating to those elites. They withdrew their consent. They walked away, leaving their so-called betters ruling over empty dirt plazas. A ruin like this has a distinctive structure. Internal defensive walls thrown up inside the city as the rich desperately try to fortify their enclaves against their own starving population. When the people walk away, they leave unfinished monuments and buildings behind, left incomplete not by war, but because the labor force is just done with this shit. When implementing this kind of ruin, don't just think about the buildings, because this kind of ruin also leaves behind a cultural artifact of erasure. For example, Cahoeca is just a name given by later French explorers. We don't know what the city was originally called, because that name was lost to history long before Europeans arrived in America, and it is very likely that the original name was intentionally forgotten by the people who escaped the city. It is a city buried by rejection. Of course, central to any ruin is the culture that built it and the culture that survived its collapse. If you want a structured way to design that history and culture, I put together Worldbuilding Blueprints Volume 1. It breaks down complex cultural design into actionable step-by-step worksheets so that your societies feel logical instead of arbitrary. It's available on my website right now, and if you use the code RUIN, R-U-I-N, at checkout, you'll get 20% off the black and white paperback edition. Link in the description. Let's look at how you apply the coroner's report to your own fiction. Follow these steps to transform a generic fantasy ruin into a living piece of history. Step 1. Establish the life support. Before you break the walls, ask, why was the city here? Was it a choke point toll booth, a caloric battery for grain, or a magical junction? You can't map its death until you know what kept it alive. And if you need help with deciding what kept it alive, check out my video on which cities exist where. Step 2. Select the vector. Choose a cause of death. Did it suffer a sudden magical flash freeze, trauma, an invading horde, homicide, a lost trade route, organ failure, or an ideological revolt, rejection? Step 3. Map the layer of destruction. If it was a homicide, mark the ash lines and the mass graves. If it was organ failure, show the repurposing, the grand library turned into a granary, the palace gates melted down for horseshoes. If it was trauma, show the frozen life, and for rejection, remember the cultural erasure. Step 4. Write the final sentence. Every ruin should tell a story in one sentence. This city died because the magic defiled the soil until the crops turned to ash. Or this city died because the king ran out of gold to pay the guards on the border road. If your ruin has no clear cause of death, it is just decoration. Delete it, or give it a failure that actually matters to the geography, culture, and history of your world. And now, while the wonderful members of the channel scroll past, let me tell you about a fantasy example, one that I find fascinating. One of my favorite D&D settings is Dark Sun, and it has a legendary location that is a great illustration of the concept of a magically induced wasteland that also hosts a city. That place is the Sea of Silt, and the city is Draxa, also known as the City of Doom. According to the fictional journal of the explorer Galek Sandstrider, Draxa is a place of pure, stark hell. In his writings, Galek describes looking out over the tortured landscape of the Sea of Silt and seeing a ring of burning rock encircling a city so massive that even the eye cannot take it all in at once. The history of Draxa is deeply tied to Dark Sun's lore. The city was originally built by the Dragon King, using the tithes of plunder after committing homicide on another city-state. For a long time, Draxa was widely considered the greatest city in all the world. However, Draxa was eventually destroyed during the apocalyptic final struggles between the Sorcerer Kings and the dark entity Rajat, leaving behind nothing but haunted, desolate ruins. The driving force behind this devastation is a localized environmental catastrophe caused by magic. In the Dark Sun universe, defiling magic works by aggressively draining the life force out of the surrounding soil, plants, and living creatures to power spells. During the magical conflicts that occurred here, so much energy was violently sucked from the earth that it completely destroyed the local ecosystem, leaving Draxa stranded in a toxic wasteland of ash, silt, and fire. It is a wonderful example of sudden trauma created by magic rather than natural forces, and it's deeply tied into both the ideology of the world and its fantasy systems. So it's well worth studying as an example of creating a ruin that really enhances your setting instead of just decorating it. If you're still with me, leave me a building emoji in the comments. And while you're down there, hit all the good buttons, the thumbs up, the hype, and so on. If you want to see more from me about destroying stuff, check out my video on creating apocalypses. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time World Building.